I have watched people spend their whole lives preparing for the wrong emergency. That is not a small mistake. It is one of the largest mistakes a serious person can make with money. The world teaches people to prepare for volatility. It teaches them to prepare for recessions. It teaches them to prepare for market corrections, layoffs, higher rates, lower rates, and bad timing. Fine, all of that matters. But there is another kind of event that people almost never prepare for properly, even though history keeps teaching the lesson with remarkable consistency. They do not prepare for what happens when money itself begins losing credibility. Not a bad quarter, not a bear market, not a temporary decline in asset prices. I mean something deeper. The kind of period where the medium through which a society stores value starts becoming less trustworthy than the goods, land, tools, skills, and businesses that sit outside the promise. That is the event most people think belongs to distant countries, strange political systems, old black and white photographs, or dramatic history books that have nothing to do with modern life. That is a dangerous assumption. One of the most revealing stories I ever encountered came out of Germany in 1923. A banker in Berlin had done what every responsible person of his era had been taught to do. He saved. He bought government bonds. He trusted the pension promises made to him. He kept money in a reputable bank. He behaved exactly the way polite society calls prudent, right up until the year prudence was redefined by force. By the end of that year, much of what he had spent 30 years building would not buy him a modest meal. Meanwhile, a farmer not very far outside the city, a man with no polished education in finance, no grand social position, and no elegant theories about monetary order, became richer in practical terms almost by accident. He had grain, he had land, he had things people needed, while paper promises were collapsing. The banker owned claims, the farmer owned necessities. That is the distinction that matters. Same country, same crisis, same year, completely different outcomes. When I first thought deeply about that contrast, I realized something that has shaped almost everything I believe about resilience. The thing that separates ruin from survival in a currency crisis is often not intelligence, social class, professional status, or even formal financial sophistication. It is what you hold when confidence in the money starts to fail. That pattern is not unique to Germany. It repeats with eerie regularity across time and geography. The names change, the governments change, the language changes, the emotion never really changes, and the categories of assets that survive do not change nearly as much as people imagine. I am not saying every modern economy is about to wake up tomorrow in hyperinflation. I am not making a cartoon prediction. I do not invest that way, and I do not think that way. What I am saying is more useful. When you study 4,000 years of monetary stress, the same categories keep showing up on the winning side of the line, and the same categories keep showing up on the losing side that is worth taking seriously. The public often wants a list. Fine. There are 6 broad categories I would want any serious person to understand. If the subject is what survives when money dies, weakens badly, or becomes less trusted than the things it is meant to measure. The first is productive land. The second is gold. The third is businesses with real pricing power. The fourth is claims denominated in stronger outside currencies or jurisdictions. The fifth is real estate with actual utility. The sixth is essential skills. Those 6 are not a religion. They are not a guarantee. But they are the nearest thing history gives us to a recurring pattern of resilience. Now, I want to explain why, because if you do not understand why they work, then the list itself is just another piece of trivia, and trivia has never made anybody safer. Let me begin with land, because land is the oldest asset in the world and perhaps the easiest to misunderstand. When people say land, they often mean a line item on a net worth statement. That is not what I mean. I mean productive land, land that grows food, land that holds water, land that supports livestock, land that contains something necessary to physical life or economic activity. The reason this matters is simple. Currencies can fail. Political promises can fail. Pensions can fail. Banks can fail. Accounting units can fail. The human need for food, water, shelter, and raw materials does not fail. The farmer in Weimar Germany did not become stronger because he had a clever portfolio. He became stronger because he controlled an asset that remained necessary while the unit used to measure value was collapsing. People still had to eat, families still needed flour, animals still needed feed. That reality was more important than any number printed on a bond certificate. The same thing happened in Zimbabwe. The same thing happened in countless periods where paper lost meaning faster than real needs. Disappeared land has a remarkable feature in these periods. It produces something the currency cannot dilute. A bushel of wheat is still a bushel of wheat. A cow is still a cow. A water source is still a water source. This is why I care so much about the distinction between productive assets and nominal claims. A nominal claim is only as strong as the system standing behind it. A productive asset has value before, during, and after the system as credibility is questioned. Now, I am not romantic about farmland or rural ownership. Land can be mismanaged, land can be overleveraged, land can be bought stupidly. Taxes matter, liquidity matters, geography matters, climate matters. None of this is magic. But when I ask what kind of thing I would rather hold if the monetary order became deeply unstable, I will choose productive land over a bank statement in the failing currency every time. That is not ideology, it is hierarchy. I prefer what feeds life over what merely records a number. The second asset is gold, and this one makes otherwise rational people emotional in both directions. Some people treat gold like a religion. Other people mock it because it does not produce earnings. I do not belong to either camp. Gold is not a productive business. It does not invent anything. It does not hire managers who increase return on capital. It does not widen a moat through pricing power or customer affection. So in ordinary periods, I will almost always prefer a wonderful business to a shiny metal that is still true. But in a genuine monetary crisis, gold performs a different job. It is not there to outgrow the economy. It is there to outlast the failure of trust in official money. That is a very different function when a currency weakens severely or breaks entirely. Society needs something to use as money or as near money immediately, not eventually, immediately. And for thousands of years, when paper promises have failed or been degraded badly enough, human beings have repeatedly returned to precious metals, especially gold, because gold carries a peculiar combination of qualities. It is recognizable. It is difficult to counterfeit well at scale. It is portable relative to its value. It is divisible enough to function in exchange with the right channels. And most importantly, no government can create more of it with a keyboard. That last point is everything. Modern people often underestimate how much monetary trust depends on scarcity. A currency works because people believe the unit will remain limited enough and reliable enough that holding it is sensible. When that belief weakens, they begin looking for something outside the issuance power of the authority that damaged the unit. That is where gold enters, not because it is mystical, because it is outside the promise machine. During the French assignat disaster, people who got into gold early preserved purchasing power while paper holders were destroyed. In Argentina, Russia, Venezuela, and many other places, versions of the same story repeated. Gold holders were not necessarily getting rich in some triumphant sense. They were simply avoiding the fate of those whose paper claims were melting. There is a big difference between getting rich and staying solvent while other people become poorer. Gold is better at the second task than the first. That is why central banks themselves hold so much of it. The public is often told by official voices that gold is an old relic. I notice that the same institutions issuing modern paper currency still keep enormous quantities of the relic on their own balance sheets. I pay attention to that. The wise person always watches what institutions do more closely than what they say. Now, a sensible person should not treat gold as the whole answer. Gold does not feed you. Gold does not generate cash flow. Gold does not pay property taxes or insurance premiums or payroll or dividends. But as a monetary insurance asset, held modestly and lawfully, it has a role that history keeps reaffirming. The role is not fantasy wealth. The role is surviving paper failure. That is enough. The third category is, in my opinion, the most powerful for the long-term owner: businesses with real pricing power. Notice I did not say businesses, I said businesses with real pricing power. That difference matters more than most people realize. A currency crisis does not spare all companies. Most businesses do not survive such periods well. In fact, many are destroyed precisely because they cannot adjust quickly enough, cannot pass through costs, or are selling things people can postpone, replace, or simply live without when conditions become chaotic. What survives is not business in the abstract. What survives is necessity plus pricing power. If a company sells what people absolutely need and can raise prices as fast as the currency deteriorates, it has a chance to defend its real margins while the money unit is failing. That is an extraordinary power. If a company sells luxury or discretionary nonsense, or if it is locked into long-term pricing contracts while costs rise hourly or daily, it can die even while its nominal revenues look large. Again, the distinction is not academic, it is survival. During Brazil's inflationary years, businesses with the ability to reprice quickly and sell essentials kept up far better than businesses tied to fixed rates or non-essential demand. Supermarkets, food producers, energy providers, medicine, and certain basic consumer categories can sometimes defend themselves because the customer cannot simply stop buying. That does not make them invincible. It does make them structurally advantaged. I have spent a lifetime preferring good businesses over inert assets. That instinct only becomes more important when money becomes less honest. The right businesses become a bridge between the abstract world of pricing units and the physical world of human need. That is a very valuable bridge to own. I think about it this way. A weak currency changes the price of everything, but it does not change the fact that people need food, fuel, medicine, basic transportation, electricity, soap, water, and certain forms of shelter and communication. The business that sits between human necessity and a decaying currency has a chance to keep its economics real. That is why I care so much about pricing power, not because I admire corporate strength for its own sake, but because pricing power is one of the few shields the owner can hold when the measuring stick itself is becoming unreliable. Now, this is also where amateurs get fooled. They hear that businesses with pricing power survive inflation and suddenly imagine every stock market exposure gives them that protection. A broad index contains businesses with and without pricing power. A stock with a strong brand but weak balance sheet can still get hurt badly. A commodity-sensitive manufacturer may have no pricing power at all. A retailer may have enormous top-line volume and little ability to preserve margins. So again, structure matters. The lesson is not buy stocks. The lesson is own businesses that can stay economically real while paper gets weaker. That is a much narrower and more valuable statement. The fourth category is outside currency claims. This is one of the most practical and least romantic forms of protection. When a local currency is failing, the simplest thing in the world is to own claims denominated in something stronger, more stable, or at least less damaged. That can mean actual foreign currency holdings. It can mean short-term sovereign claims in a stronger jurisdiction. It can mean accounts, assets, or businesses tied to more stable monetary systems. It can mean lawful geographic diversification. The principle is the same. If the unit in which your wealth is measured is collapsing, you do not want every part of your wealth trapped inside that same unit. That is not sophisticated finance. That is plain arithmetic. The wealthy have understood this almost everywhere monetary instability has appeared. In Latin America, when local currencies became unstable, many of the wealthier families did not keep everything sitting domestically in local terms. They owned dollars, they owned offshore assets, they owned property and accounts in other jurisdictions. Meanwhile, ordinary savers who had spent decades keeping everything in local bank accounts, local pension structures, and local bonds found themselves experiencing the crisis from the inside, while wealthier families experienced it from just outside the blast radius. That is not moral commentary. It is pattern recognition. A currency crisis always has an inside and an outside. The people with no external reference point, no foreign denominated asset, no outside claim, no alternative store of value, get forced to live entirely inside the failure. That is a miserable place to be. This is also why capital controls are such an ominous signal. When authorities start making it harder to move money, convert money, or get money outside the system, they are telling you something indirectly. They are telling you the exit has become interesting enough that they fear its use. That is worth hearing. Again, I am not telling anyone to evade laws, hide money, or behave illegally. I am saying that legal diversification across monetary systems is one of the most rational things a person can understand in a world where no single fiat regime deserves blind eternal trust. The fifth category is real estate. But here I need to be precise. Real estate is not a magic shield. Wrong real estate can be disastrous. Overleveraged real estate can turn a currency problem into a personal liquidation. Speculative real estate bought at the wrong price can fail spectacularly. So when I say real estate survives, I mean useful, physical, necessary real estate with sensible structure around it. A building has replacement cost. A building has utility. A building exists outside the symbolic realm of paper claims. If you own a useful apartment building, a house in a necessary location, or a practical piece of income, producing real estate without foolish leverage, then the nominal pricing of the local currency may gyrate wildly, while the thing itself remains stubbornly real that matters. In Weimar Germany, owners of real buildings came through much better than owners of deposits, pensions, and nominal bonds. In post-Soviet Russia, real estate often became a store of actual survival value, while the currency system lost credibility. The reason is not mysterious. You cannot print a building. You cannot legislatively create the concrete, steel, labor, and physical utility of an already existing property. You can reprice it in absurd nominal units. Yes, you can tax it, you can regulate it, you can burden it, all true, but you cannot simply will it into non-existence the way you can destroy the purchasing power of a bank balance. That is the core lesson. People need places to live. Businesses need places to operate. Useful real estate remains embedded in real life even while monetary life becomes unstable. I want to underline the word useful. Let's put a speculation is not a utility. A vacation condo bought at the top with heavy debt is not the same thing as a sensible residential property in a durable area. Again, the public loves to turn categories into slogans. I hate that the category helps only if the structure is right. The final category is the one people talk about the least and need the most. Essential skills. This is the only crisis-resistant asset that begins in the human being rather than in a balance sheet. It is also the most underrated. People are constantly told to invest in themselves, usually in a vague and sentimental way. I am not speaking sentimentally at all. I am speaking economically. When money fails, portable usefulness rises in value. A doctor who can treat illness, an electrician who can restore power, a mechanic who can fix essential machinery, a farmer who can grow food, a builder who can repair shelter, a technician who can keep needed systems operating. A person with genuinely useful, non-trivial skills can often negotiate in real time and get paid in whatever medium still works because the service itself remains indispensable. In Hungary's post-war hyperinflation, fixed salaries were annihilated. Skilled labor with direct necessary value had a much better chance because the economy, however distorted, still required problem solvers. The same logic appears again and again. The crisis does not remove the need for competence. It often sharpens it. That is why I find essential skills so beautiful in this context. They cannot be inflated away. They cannot be frozen at a bank. They cannot be fully confiscated as long as the skill lives in you, and you can still practice it. They can be taxed, yes. They can be regulated, yes. But the underlying productive power is personal and portable in a way that financial assets are not. A person with no capital but strong, useful skills is in a far better crisis position than a person with paper wealth and no ability to create value directly. That is a hard truth. It is also an empowering one because, unlike land or gold or buildings, skills are not restricted to people who already have significant capital. They can be built, they can be strengthened, they can be compounded by discipline, and in every age, including our own, there is something almost magical about the person who can still solve expensive, necessary problems while everyone else is trapped discussing abstractions. Now, when you put these 6 categories together, a pattern becomes obvious. They all have something in common. They derive value from outside the failing currency. That is the secret. Productive land produces food or resources. Gold exists outside policy issuance. Pricing power businesses sell necessities and can adapt. Foreign currency claims sit in another unit. Real estate carries physical utility. Skills produce value directly. What do the losing assets have in common? They depend on the local money. Retaining credibility, savings accounts, government bonds, pensions, fixed income promises, long-dated claims in a weakening currency. These look responsible in stable times, and I want to be very careful here because I am not telling people that all of these are foolish in every environment. They are not. A savings account is useful. High-quality sovereign paper can be rational. Pensions can matter. Ordinary financial architecture has its place. What I am saying is that in severe monetary stress, the responsible assets are often the first to get quietly destroyed because they sit closest to the system trying to save itself. That is the brutal part. The very assets sold to the public as safe are often safe only as long as the issuing order remains orderly. Once the order itself becomes the problem, the promises made inside that order start looking much weaker. That is why I have always believed there is a deep difference between nominal safety and real safety. Nominal safety means the statement balance still looks fine. Real safety means purchasing power, utility, and control survive. The banker in Germany had nominal prudence. The farmer had real resilience. That story has replayed in different forms far too many times to ignore. Now, I do not want you to misunderstand me and think the lesson is to run around like a fanatic buying land, metal buildings, and canned goods while abandoning all financial discipline. That would be foolish. The lesson is not extremism. The lesson is structure. Ask yourself a few honest questions. How much of what I call wealth is really just a claim on a system continuing to behave normally? How much of what I own would remain meaningful if the local money weakened badly? Do I own anything tied to real necessity? Do I own anything outside the local unit account? Do I own any businesses with actual pricing power? Is my real estate useful and sensibly financed or simply speculative? If my financial assets were impaired, what skills would still let me create value immediately? These are not dramatic questions. They are adult questions, and a serious person should be able to answer them before a crisis makes the answers urgent. The dollar itself offers an interesting modern lesson. Most Americans think of inflation as a moderate annoyance and therefore not worth deep structural thought. But the dollar has already lost the overwhelming majority of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve era began. That did not happen in one theatrical explosion. It happened gradually through long stretches in a society wealthy enough and productive enough to hide the full emotional effect from many people. That is what slow monetary erosion looks like in a relatively successful country. The point is not that every slow erosion becomes an Argentina or a Weimar. The point is that a long record of purchasing power destruction should humble anyone tempted to treat fiat money as a permanent store of value rather than a tool of exchange and calculation. I have always preferred to own productive things over stagnant promises for exactly that reason. A currency is a claim. A business is a machine. A field is a field, a house is a house, a skill is a skill. You can distort the measuring stick. You cannot fully wish away the underlying thing. That is why real wealth, if it is to survive across regimes, must own more things and fewer assumptions. I think one of the most dangerous habits in modern finance is the tendency to confuse convenience with security. People like digital statements because they are easy. They like government promises because they sound official. They like local banks because they are familiar. They like pensions because they feel earned. They like long-term nominal instruments because the numbers appear stable. None of those preferences is evil or absurd, but they become dangerous if they crowd out the harder assets, the real assets, the externally anchored assets, and the skills that do not require everything to go right at once. That is what resilience really is. Not maximizing return in one regime, surviving many regimes. There is another misconception I want to challenge. People think crisis protection must look ugly and paranoid. I do not think that. I think it can look calm, diversified, legal, and sensible. A modest allocation to precious metals for monetary insurance, real exposure to businesses with pricing power rather than blind dependence on long-duration nominal claims, some lawful diversification into stronger currencies or jurisdictions, thoughtful real estate or land exposure where it truly makes sense. Actual skill building that improves your ability to create value no matter what markets do. A serious reserve system instead of blind trust in one channel. That is not extremism. That is simply refusing to put all your faith in the uninterrupted honesty of paper. History has not earned the right to ask for that level of trust. So if I were speaking very plainly to you, I would say this. The question is not whether the next crisis will look exactly like the last one. It will not. The question is whether what you hold belongs to the class of things history keeps rescuing or the class of things history keeps exposing. That is a much more useful question. Because when people lose money in a monetary crisis, it is rarely because they failed to read enough opinions. It is because what they held was too close to the failing promise and too far from physical necessity, external scarcity, or personal productive power. In the end, every crisis becomes a sorting mechanism, not between the good and the bad, between the nominal and the real, between paper confidence and tangible necessity, between claims and control, between the people who trusted the unit and the people who own something deeper than the unit. That is what I want you to remember. Not fear, not fantasy, pattern. Pattern is enough. Pattern says the same 6 categories keep surviving. Pattern says the same safe, nominal assets keep disappointing. People who trusted them too literally. Pattern says that when money weakens badly, the economy does not stop. It simply changes the hierarchy of what matters. Food matters, shelter matters, energy matters, portable money matters, useful businesses matter, skills matter. Everything else has to argue harder for its value. That is not a prediction of tomorrow morning. It is a lesson from a very long yesterday. And if you take it seriously while conditions are still calm, you give yourself something extremely valuable. Not certainty, not immunity, perspective. And perspective, when everyone else is still living inside the illusion of permanent normality, may be one of the greatest financial assets you can possess.